Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Path Ahead webinar series. We have an exciting and action-packed and information-packed episode for you today. We're going to be looking at current and potential, as in the works, federal funding sources to support outdoor recreation. We have with us our guests, Merrill Harrell, who's the Deputy Undersecretary of Natural Resources and the Environment with USDA, which is the United States Department of Agriculture. Lee McGivney, also with USDA, United States Department of Agriculture, Rural Development. I'm training myself not to use acronyms, but I might have to. We have Kurt Kaiser, who's the Economic Development Administration for Montana and Wyoming, and Kent Wellner from the United States Forest Service in Region 1, Montana. Next slide. So just for a little housekeeping, I have no acronym challenge for our panelists. A lot of times people, aren't as familiar with the acronyms of which our agencies are steeped. So if you find yourself using an acronym, maybe define it. And otherwise, if you define it and move through, maybe we can continue to use it. We're asking folks to post their questions in the chat, and we will either get to them throughout the webinar or we will answer them at the end. If you have tech difficulties, you can text Rachel, who's running the back end, at 406-579-0364. Next. So I'm the host of the series. I'm the founder and CEO of Montana Access Project, which is committed to supporting rural communities achieve inspired outdoor recreation access for everyone every day. I'm a serial recreation entrepreneur. I've founded the Montana State Parks Foundation. I've founded Whitefish Trails and Whitefish Legacy Partners, which I've been working on for almost 20 years. I founded Safe Trails Whitefish, which is an in-town safe and accessible transportation group. I've served on the Montana Environmental Quality Council for several terms. I was on the first Montana State Parks and Recreation Board. So basically, I'm a front country fanatic, and I'm committed to the ecosystem of services, agencies, support, et cetera, that make recreation great and access to nature great. Next slide. So today, our key takeaways are going to be, we're going to get an update on federal funding for outdoor recreation, which includes some of these national initiatives, which you may be hearing about. We have the latest on outdoor recreation initiatives that are fueling economic recovery as we're coming out of COVID, fingers crossed, or people are coming out of COVID, whether COVID is done with us or not. We'll look at some examples of community-led, resources for community-led efforts in rural Montana communities, and how parks, trails, and recreation access fit into infrastructure funding. So it's really packed. It's packed, and it's going to be informative, and you're going to be on the leading edge of these efforts. Next. So I show this slide every time. The reason we're here is that outdoor recreation is at the nexus of economic vitality, health, and quality of life. There have been a ton of studies on health and wellness, a lot of studies on the importance of outdoor recreation access for economic vitality. And there was a recent study here in Montana on the importance of outdoor recreation for quality of life. The University of Montana did a study, and they looked at what are the key drivers that make entrepreneurs come and do business in Montana. And the number one reason was quality of life. They took it a little bit farther. So they said, all right, well, if we're looking at quality of life, we're going to parse it up into 6 categories. We're going to look at personal safety. We're going to look at education. We're going to look at cost of living. We're going to look at government incentives. We're going to look at, tax climate, and we're going to look at outdoor spaces, outdoor recreation, parks, and open spaces. And so when they did that, they found that of quality of life, access to the outdoors, outdoor recreation, parks, and open spaces is number 1. More important than education, more important than cost of living. Cost of living was number 2. More important than access to medical care. It is critically important for our economic vitality, our community vitality. So it's not, outdoor recreation is not messing around. It's not just a nicety. Next. When you look at the this quick snapshot, maybe you've seen this before, maybe not. Montana is number 1 in this nation in the percentage of its GDP that is outdoor recreation related. It's responsible for 26,000 jobs, which is 5.4% of the employment in our state. Those numbers are down from prior years due to COVID, pandemic, supply chain issues, etc. But it is an economic powerhouse. Next. So it is an economic powerhouse, and sometimes that power gets lumped into tourism, meaning we're providing for tourists, we're inviting tourists, and tourists are the basis for economic generation. But we know, number 1, from those studies that the University of Montana did about businesses locating in Montana, it's not about tourism, it's about quality of life. And the other part of tourism is it's a double-edged sword. So this slide here, while we have enormous opportunity, I just clipped these real quick from, if you look at promoting dark skies and stargazing in Yellowstone country, which is southern Montana. You look at Lincoln County's website, their Northwest Outdoor Recreation Playground. Glendive is committed to getting people outdoors and using its amazing state park, Makoshika State Park, as an economic driver. And there's now an effort in the Lower Yellowstone to create a recreation amenity, connected, water-based, land-based experiences in the Lower Yellowstone. And the legislature seed funded that with $4 million. At the same time, I clipped these from a Flathead Beacon article that came out, I don't know, a month ago or so, when they did a tourism roundtable here. Glacier Country did a tourism roundtable. The article highlighted these sort of myths or challenges that are coming out of tourism. One is, I'm calling it the Wild West myth. This was Erica Huertala said, there's an underground message that says, come to Montana and do whatever the hell you want. Well, that's not true. That doesn't lead to recreate responsibly. Comment about Disneyland, you've probably heard it. People assume just because they're they're on vacation, that no one lives here and everything is for their amusement, like Disneyland. There's the solution is dilution. So it's this theory that we can alleviate some of the pressures, tourism pressures, outside of the parks, outside of, Glacier National Park, for example, by dispersing those folks. At the same time, we've got challenges in places like Big Sky that are heavily reliant on tourism, over water quality issues. And then I don't know if you saw that article in the New York Times that says pandemic crowds bring Rivergeddon to Montana's rivers. There's the word Disneyland again. So the importance is that as we look forward and we look at these solutions, it's really holistic the way we invest in our communities. And that's why I have these federal experts here today, because we all have to recognize that community vitality is really critical to success if we're going to invest in economically vital communities. I was in a call with someone, and someone in the call asked, well, how will we know what to build? What do tourists want? And this guy who had been in the park industry for a long time, he said, you know what? If you like it, they'll like it. So instead of thinking about building things that people are going to come to want to do, change it up a little bit and think about what works for your community. Next slide. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to these amazing guests, but I just sort of wanted to paint this picture that we have outdoor recreation funding, but I think what you're going to hear from our guests from all of these different sources and all of these different angles is that it's not one size fits all, and there's a tremendous amount of both overlap and opportunity to leverage among these sources. So just keep that in mind, and sit back and put on your seatbelts, because you're going to get a tremendous amount of information. And we will turn it over to our first guest, Meryl Harrell. Meryl, if you could introduce yourself briefly and take it away.
Thanks so much. That was a great lead-in. I'm Meryl Harrell. I'm the Deputy Undersecretary for Natural Resources and Environment at USDA. I work very closely with the Forest Service and my colleagues at the department, including rural development and across the administration. Next slide. Really appreciate the invitation to join you today to talk about outdoor recreation and how we are supporting all of those outcomes that you just highlighted around economic opportunity, health and wellness, and quality of life associated with equitable access to the outdoors. Next slide. As you just heard, we recognize recreation as an enormous economic driver, and equitable access to the outdoors has never been more important for social and community well-being. National forests and grasslands support millions of recreation visitors annually. In fiscal year 2019, there were 150 million visits to national forests and grasslands. And during the pandemic, we saw an unprecedented surge of visitation as Americans sought refuge and outdoor experiences. That really critical element of health and well-being, physical and mental health, quality of life, connection, the ability to go outdoors. So in fiscal year 2020, there were 168 million visits to National Forest System lands. All of those visits supported jobs and supported economic contributions to the GDP nationally, as well as supporting local businesses and economic opportunity through everything from food and lodging, guides, outfitting, transportation, and ancillary investments and other services. We also know that proximity to the outdoors attracts people who want to live, work, and play in special places. Counties with public lands enjoy higher economic growth, and residents report higher quality of life. There are so many benefits to communities near outdoor amenities, and we want to support equitable access to those amenities and help grow the outdoor recreation economy and people's connection to the outdoors. Next slide, please. So I thought I'd just highlight for you a couple of the current investments and funding and partnerships that USDA through the Forest Service and other partner agencies are working on. And I think you'll hear more about this from my colleagues in the webinar. So I'll just give an initial highlight. We work in many ways to support the outdoor rec economy, from providing access to public lands, supporting visitor services, maintaining recreation infrastructure, and connecting land management to social and economic sustainability related to outdoor access. We partner with other federal agencies, tribes, state offices of outdoor recreation, local communities, nonprofit organizations, and other partners to highlight and create opportunities for equitable access and growth. The examples that I'm wanting to highlight include the Great American Outdoors Act. So through GAOA, the acronym, funding, that really is a pathway to catalyze rural economic development through investments in land conservation and deferred maintenance that promote public and private partnerships, tourism and recreation, public lands protection, improvements to visitor access and experiences, support for underserved communities, the ability to mitigate climate change, and to keep forests as forests. Forest Service has already identified more than 1,000 projects, and we're in the process of reviewing the next round. And Kent will talk more about what that looks like in Region 1 and Montana. The Recreation Economy for Rural Communities program, RERC, was started in 2020, the partnership between the Forest Service's state and private forestry deputy area, as well as partnering with EPA and the Northern Border Regional Commission, and to provide planning and technical assistance for rural communities to leverage outdoor recreation as an economic development and Main Street revitalization strategy. In 2020, 170 communities applied for this technical assistance and planning assistance for 10 spots. So 10 communities created action plans with assistance from federal, state, regional, and local agencies and organizations and businesses, including each of the agencies on this webinar. And we also are partnering with the St. Regis Mohawk in New York for our first tribal planning assistance workshop. And the second round of applications was announced in October 2021, and it just closed in late November. We've received proposals from 115 communities from 39 states. And one of the first 10 was here in Montana, and I'll highlight more about what that looked like in a minute here. I also want to highlight the Forest Service Rural Development NIFA partnership on recreation economy at USDA. This partnership was initiated in 2015 to create better connectivity across the Department of Agriculture to support economic development through the lens of outdoor recreation through each of our departments and agencies. So through this partnership, we have released a toolkit for our staffs that also is available to the public. And it was just revised in 2021 that really kind of walks through the outdoor rec economy and the different ways that Forest Service, RD, and NIFA contribute and support the outdoor rec economy. And then through activating on the partnership, we collect locally our staffs to help identify grants, business services, access for recreation partners. And the Land Grant University's tourism extension programs and extension agents also provide consensus building and support and planning. And we're really committed to continuing that relationship and partnership throughout. And then the last thing I'll highlight is the Native American Tourism and Improving Visitor Experience Act, which has direction to empower connections with Native American communities, increase coordination and collaboration, and expand heritage and cultural tourism opportunities. In FY21, the Forest Service distributed $1 million across all 9 Forest Service regions, and we expect that to increase in fiscal year 22. So I will, next slide, please. Like to just dive in as an example of how working together we can really have an impact. The Thompson Falls, Montana was one of the communities selected for the first 10 planning assistance, technical assistance sites for the Recreation Economy for Rural Communities workshop. The community self-identified these workshop goals around asset inventory, physical connections, regional promotion, business and workforce development, and youth engagement. The next slide, please. The workshop occurred with participation from many folks on this webinar. And since then, there was a priority implementation plan that was created. The local team has conducted surveys with junior high and high school students to find out what is most compelling about the community and connections to the outdoors. So very much along the lines of what do you enjoy, and that will be what others enjoy as well. Work plans have been developed and applications for funding have been submitted for wayfinding and signage, an application to highlight outdoor recreation assets, and a master plan for developing new outdoor recreation amenities, and an RBDG grant, Rural Business Development Grant from Rural Development was provided to support hiring a countywide outdoor recreation and tourism promotion director. So it really shows that how working together, we can collectively have an impact to help deliver community-led and community-identified priorities for economic opportunity, revitalization, and community well-being in terms of quality of life and access to the outdoors. Next slide, please. So wanting to highlight a couple of the opportunities looking forward. With the America the Beautiful initiative that the administration has been working on, increasing access for outdoor recreation and creating more outdoor opportunities in nature-deprived communities are two of the most significant priorities for America the Beautiful. And that includes collaborating across multiple departments and agencies to help identify and work towards locally led and driven priorities, working with tribal governments, working with states, working with many other partners to advance those outcomes. There are also priorities around habitat, corridors and conservation, tribally led conservation and restoration priorities, work with private working landowners on voluntary conservation, and job creation in restoration and resilience. So all of which have intersections with access to the outdoors and outdoor recreation. I'd like to highlight the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. We are really excited to be working to implement what's the single largest investment in our nation's infrastructure and competitiveness and the resilience of our physical and natural systems. There are incredible opportunities that are related to outdoor recreation that come through the IIJA, and Ken will highlight more in particular in Region 1 in Montana, but I do want to highlight a couple of areas of emphasis. The opportunity to really change the trajectory on wildfire risk and post-fire risk reduction and mitigation is directly related to the resilience of the outdoor economy and the ability to mitigate risks to outdoor assets and access to the outdoors. So thinking about how wildfire risk reduction and making sure that there's opportunities for investment in the infrastructure needs that in order to create resilience to fire, and then also to increased extreme weather events, including post-fire events like flooding and landslides that can impact communities and can impact the ability to have resilient access to the outdoors. It can't be understated, and the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act is an incredible down payment on that work. There's more investment that's needed, but it will really unlock the ability to do more to change that trajectory. There's also investments in ecosystem restoration, which are critical for having the outdoor spaces that we want to be able to go and recreate, as well as investing in wildfire pay and equity for the workforce that puts their lives on the line to protect people, communities, and natural resources. And I'll highlight two more opportunities. The Build Back Better bill has an incredible amount of resources for all of the things that are going to be critical for the outdoors, and including direct investments in outdoor recreation. So we're hoping that we see those investments and have the opportunity to implement the Build Back Better programs and investments. I also want to highlight the fiscal year 22 dollars, our base appropriations dollars. We are working to rebuild the recreation staff and be able to support positive outdoor experiences and inclusive outdoor opportunities, as well as continue to invest in recreation programs and infrastructure and assets, realizing that there's a lot of rebuilding that we need to do because of the historic erosion of those staff areas, because of the growth of the fire budget. So we're really looking forward to being able to reinvest in the recreation staff and programs that will support positive outdoor experiences and the outdoor rec economy. Last slide, please. These are just a few resources, including the revised toolkit for the recreation economy at USDA, as well as the updated Bureau of Economic Analysis data that was updated most recently in November 2021, and a number of other resources that can support growing the outdoor rec economy and connections to the outdoors for communities across the country. Next slide. And that's the end. Thanks so much.
Wow, that was amazing. I have about 100 questions, but I think I'll keep them to the end. So next we have Kirk from the Economic Development Administration. And as I showed on that slide before, you know, there really are both current and emerging opportunities to leverage these different agencies and different funding sources and different approaches going forward. So I'm going to turn it over to Kirk. If you would introduce yourself a little bit and take it away.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. Kirk Kaiser. I've been with EDA getting close to 7 years now, and our whole mission is job creation, job retention, diversification, and resiliency sort of things. Ironically, Lee and I worked together 10 years ago or something like that. So I was at USDA Rural Development for about 5 years, and prior to that, as you can see, I was a banker and jumped to auditing credit unions and realized it's more fun to create deals than to critique them. So glad to be back in the creating deals realm. So a little bit about me from the background. I grew up in eastern Montana, little town of Circle, Montana. So the N2A stint took me to Denver for a year, and I realized that Montana is really where I needed to be. So I look forward to hopefully living the rest of my life here. So next slide, please. So we are the Economic Development Administration, and basically we're the economic development arm of the federal government. As I mentioned, our whole mission is job creation, job retention, diversification, resiliency sort of things. So let's go to the next slide. Oops, I'm ahead of myself. So yeah, essentially we're trying to promote private investments, make areas more resilient to whether it's a cyclical economy, whether it be outdoor recreation, energy, anything like that. So our whole goal is trying to stabilize the economy, so when something happens, it doesn't take a huge hiccup. Next slide. These are our investment priorities. So any of our ARPA money, the American Rescue Plan Act funding, needs to address at least one of these. And the one for sure it has to address is the recovering and resilience. But if the project addresses more of them, it's better. So there's equity, recovering resilience, workforce development, manufacturing, technology-based economic development, environmentally sustainable development, and then exports and foreign direct investment. And the website that's there has a little blurb on each one of those of what each one entails. So I won't go into that detail just to save us some time. You want to go to the next slide? I guess I edited these. I'm proud of myself, I guess. I'm going to focus on the number 3, 4, 5, and 6, primarily because the timelines for 1 and 2 have passed. So travel and tourism is a new notice of funding opportunity, NOFO is what I'll call it, that came out, I think it was in late July, as well as the economic adjustment assistance, the indigenous communities, and the Good Jobs Challenge. So I'll go into some more detail on each of those here in a moment, but in the past, EDA has always had 1 NOFO, so it's been interesting trying to learn 6 all at once. And I guess the thing I would point out even more so is the dollars there that are showing, like the 750 for travel and tourism, is actually a number nationwide that was allocated by Congress. So our Denver region encompasses 10 states, which basically is Iowa, Missouri to Montana, and the Dakotas to Utah. So our 750 quickly becomes 20 million to cover 10 states. Same thing for the economic adjustment assistance. The 500 million becomes roughly 60 million. And there's a subset in there for about 24 million for coal impacted areas. And then indigenous communities, the 100 becomes a little over 11 million. And then the Good Jobs Challenge actually is a nationwide effort. So we don't know what that is. That deadline is forthcoming. So next slide. So I'll jump into the travel and tourism. There was a non-competitive component for the state. You guys may have heard about it, but I won't go into too much detail with that. I think they're still working out the details of what that's going to look like. But what we want to focus on is the competitive funding that's available. That's under that 240 million, which truly equates to 20 million for our 10 states. But we're just trying to help accelerate communities that were impacted by COVID that are very much relying on the travel and tourism areas. So everything from infrastructure to trails to the NOFO lists a fair sizable number of or types of projects, I guess. There's everything water and storm sewer, pier construction, which probably won't happen in our area. New outdoor recreation, nature-based infrastructure, cultural arts and tourism facilities, workforce training facilities, accessibility enhancements, and countrywide and multi-state travel and tourism promotion. So truly it's uncharted territory for EDA because our primary mission in the past has been skilled labor, good paying jobs, if you will, like manufacturing, the trades, that sort of thing. So the travel and tourism is definitely a new area for us. I think what's going to be most competitive is if we can tie some sort of job creation and or retention and any sort of private investment to a project from EDA. I really think those are going to be a little more challenging in the travel and tourism sector compared to what we typically would fund, but I still think if we can attribute some of those, it'll be helpful. Next slide, please. So economic adjustment assistance. This is actually one of our flagship programs that EDA has had for 50 plus years. And there's actually just a pot of funding available for that under this ARPA NOFO. So this is truly what I was mentioning before with, if it's not a travel and tourism project, that if it's got the job creation component, diversification, resiliency sort of efforts, I think that's where it would work in this. And I really believe the job creation, job retention, and private investment are going to be critical in being competitive for this bucket of money. Also under this, it says 200 million available for coal, communities commitment. That's where I mentioned roughly 24 million is available for coal impacted areas in our 10 states. Eligible applicants on all of these, both the tourism and this one, is basically anyone but a for-profit. So a town, a county, a state, college, tribe, university, pretty wide open as long as it's not a for-profit. This program also has the need for a beneficiary where we say as a result of EDA's investment in this infrastructure or whatever it is, that we've got a beneficiary on the backside that says, as a result of EDA's investment, I, the business, plan to create 30 jobs over a 9-year period and invest 12 million in private investment, or whatever the number is. The deadline for this one, I'll get to a third one here in a second, is February 1 to apply for. The NOFO actually shows March 31st, I believe. But we're trying to make the round as competitive as possible. So we did it in 2 tranches, where the first one was applications received by October 1, were reviewed in October and decided in November with announcements already made. Same thing will be for the February 1 applications. They'll be reviewed in February, decided in March with announcements likely in March. So next slide. Oh, well, I cut out. Can you go back to the one that has all the funding offers? I want to go over the Indigenous communities one right there. Perfect. So the Indigenous communities funding is available to tribes only. So it actually has to be a tribe that applies for this. And these funds are truly flexible of whatever the reservation needs. Is it infrastructure? Is it workforce development? I think housing would be a far stretch from EDA to participate with, but I've been told that we would consider infrastructure for housing. So in the past, that's not something we could help out with because it had to have jobs tied to it. So let's go forward. That one has about 11 million available to it. So next slide. Next slide. Here's our webpage that's got all sorts of information from one pages on each of those NOFOs to there's been recorded webinars available. There's FAQs that actually are updating in real time. So as something changes and there's new questions that come in with we can answer, we update them there as well. So I would encourage you to check out that website. And I think one more slide, or is that the end? No. So Diane and the whole crew has my contact information. I'm more than happy to share it. Phone number is 406-599-9795. And email is first initial last name at eda.gov. So KEYSOR at eda.gov. With that, I think I'll turn it to Lee or Diane, whoever's next.
Thank you, Kirk. I'm debating whether I should break my rule about putting questions in the chat. You were under time a little bit, which you said you were going to, and I think I might use my privilege as the host to ask you a question. Could you give examples of projects that were funded, particularly with regard to rural communities? If anything rises to the top as an example of something that was funded in that first tranche, that would be great.
Yeah, it's a bit of a challenge because we had 9 applications come in and only 2 were funded. So, and the 2 weren't in my state. So I know one was equipment for a ski hill in North Dakota. And another one was, I think, a nature visitor center, education center sort of thing in Utah.
Okay.
Not a wide variety for me to pick from, but all the funds this next round need to be expended. So not only do I think it's going to be competitive, but I think we're definitely going to fund more projects than we did in the first round.
Okay. Great, thank you. Sometimes it's just hearing about programs and then thinking about how they actually get funded on the ground is helpful. Next, we have Lee McGivney. Many of you may know her already. Lee is with the USDA, which is the United States Department of Agriculture, Rural Development. So you've heard a lot of USDAs here today, but we recognize that USDA is a big agency. The Forest Service is under USDA, Rural Development is part of USDA, and Meryl is at the overseeing a lot of those programs in her position as in environment and natural resources. So Lee, I'm going to turn it over to you. If you'll introduce yourself just briefly and then take it away.
Hi, I'm Lee McGibney. I am the Business and Cooperative Program Specialist in the Great Falls Area Office. I serve an 11-county area, and you'll see in one of our slides how the state is divided. We actually have 5 offices that serve the entire state. And on a personal level, I am a mother of 3, grandmother of 9, and I have 2 dogs. And you may see them, they're my coworkers now, so they may stop in and bounce in and say hi to you guys. So if you'll go to the slide presentation, please, we can bounce to the next one, I think. Yes, okay. We like to say in rural development that we can build a community from the ground up, and with over 40 programs that we offer in housing, business, and cooperative and community facilities, we come really close to that. And I'm going to mainly speak about the business programs because that is the focus of this presentation. So the goal of our business programs is to promote a dynamic business environment across rural Montana, and that includes our 7 tribal reservations. And we do that through partnerships that leverage investment resources and projects that create or preserve jobs, provide business development opportunities in rural residents, and help agriculture producers and rural small businesses decrease their energy costs and help meet the nation's energy needs. Next slide, please. I want to talk about the Strategic Economic and Community Development Program. It's a special set-aside pool of funding for rural development projects, and rural development helps finance these projects by capitalizing on unique strengths of the community assets, identifying resources, and convening partnerships in leveraging federal, state, and local and private funding. And the SECD covers all 3 of our program fields: business, community facility, and housing. And projects that meet the requirements of SECD will compete for funding at the national office level. Next slide, please. The applicant and the project must meet the eligibility requirements of the covered program for which they're applying for, which varies by program. And the project must be physically located in a rural area or show that all of the beneficiaries of the services provided through the project will either reside in or be located in a rural area. And rural area definitions will change according to our programs, and we'll go over which ones are eligible in the next few slides. So next slide, please. The annual Rural Business Development Grant application cycle, the NOSA, which is our Notice of Solicitation for Applications, opened on September 27th and will close February 28th. The RBDG, as we like to affectionately call it, is divided into 2 component area or competition areas: the opportunity and enterprise funding. And the main difference between them is who the beneficiary of the application is going to be. If it's benefiting a community and not a business directly, then it's an opportunity project. And if it benefits a business directly, then it's an enterprise project. Our state office receives an appropriation of funds each year for projects in our state. And then we also have a national competition for SECD, persistent poverty, and Native American set-aside projects. Next slide, please. So for the RBDG program, ineligible areas are the metropolitan areas of Billings, Great Falls, and Missoula, any area that has greater than 50,000 in population. When the 2020 census comes out, Bozeman will become ineligible as well. However, areas outside of these cities may be eligible. So we encourage you to work with your local specialists to determine eligibility for your project. Opportunity projects may include feasibility studies for communities, trailhead mapping, floodplain studies, and recreation infrastructure plans. As an example, Blaine County and Prairie County have just completed their levee studies. Beaverhead County did a tourism map project. Shoto, the city of Shoto, actually did a digital tourism mapping and trail signs. And the city of Troy is in the middle of their recreation infrastructure plan. Next slide, please. Feasibility studies for the establishment of an outdoor recreation business would be eligible for enterprise funding. And if an eligible applicant is looking to start a small revolving loan fund that they can build on, this program is a great tool for them. When we look at real estate and machinery and equipment, we do want to caution you that the applicant must own the equipment or the real estate and must lease it to the ultimate recipient business at fair market rents. You cannot pass that on to the business. One of our projects that we funded through the RBDG Enterprise was a recreation project for R.L. Winston Fly Rod Company. They went through an expansion and they had a feasibility study that was done for that expansion. Next slide, please. The 1RD Business and Industry Guaranteed Loan Program, or the BNI, is actually a funding program. So we're going from planning projects now into funding for recreation businesses. And the 1RD BNI Guaranteed Program is funded year round. Next slide, please. The BNI program is lender driven, which means that the lender is our client and the borrower is their client. The lender and the borrower negotiate the rates and terms, and we just guarantee it at 80% against loss. The lender is responsible for all of the servicing on the loan, and since it's equivalent to a federally backed security, the guarantee is like an insurance policy for the lender. Which encourages them to fund projects that they normally couldn't because it doesn't count against the lender's loan limits, thus extending the lender's capacity. It can help the borrower by obtaining higher loan limits at competitive interest rates for longer repayment terms. And it can help leverage investments in opportunity zones. Next slide, please. Eligible projects that support tourism and outdoor recreation include outdoor equipment businesses, hotels, motels, bed and breakfast, RV parks, campgrounds, and convenience stores. An example, we've actually funded restaurants and hotels in Lewistown, Libby, and Fort Benton. We did the Sportsman Ski House, and we've also done some golf club houses. We can't actually do the golf club courses, but we can do any of their, like the houses or the, what do you want to call them? Equipment sales places. Debt right refinancing of the lender's current existing debt with the borrower is also an eligible project, so long as it will improve the cash flow of the business and retain jobs. And the lender may also take out other financing, which includes SBA loans. So they have a lot of flexibility with the BNI program. Next slide, please. So here are our loan limits. Maximum loan size is 25 million. We can go up to 40 million if it's for industrial projects. The maximum loan terms for working capital, machinery and equipment, and real estate. We do want to say that if it's for machinery and equipment, it's 15 years or the useful life, whichever is less. The interest rates are negotiated between the lender and the borrower, and they can be fixed or variable. And the lender fees must be reasonable and customary. There are some fees with the USDA BNI, and that's 3% at when the guarantee is issued, but that can be part of the loan structure, so it can actually be funded out of the loan funds. And there is a 0.5% annual renewal fee based on the principal balance of the guarantee on December 31st. And the annual fee can be wrapped into the lender's servicing fees. So it's collected each month, and then the ultimate recipient business doesn't have to pay it on December 31st. The loans have to be fully amortized without balloon payments. And I think that is all of the points that I wanted to go over with this one. So next slide, please. For economic development organizations looking to start a revolving loan fund for portfolio, the Rural Micro Entrepreneur Assistance Program, or RMAP, is another fantastic tool for them to use. The agency will make direct loans to the micro lenders for the purpose of providing fixed interest microloans to rural micro entrepreneurs for startup and growing businesses. And a micro entrepreneur business has 10 or fewer employees. So most of Montana's businesses will qualify for this program. Eligible micro lenders can also automatically be eligible to receive technical assistance grants. And if the economic development organization has other sources of loan funds, then we can actually just do technical assistance only grants to them. This program is competed for quarterly at the national office level. So next slide, please. Here's our maximum and minimum loan amounts. And then we also have an aggregate maximum of $2,500,000. So you can actually build this portfolio quite well. The interest rate starts out at 2%, but it'll decrease to 1% after the economic development organization has 5 years of positive performance. So next slide, please. The purpose of the intermediary relending program, revolving loan fund, is to alleviate poverty and increase economic activity and employment in rural communities, especially disadvantaged and remote communities, through financing targeted primarily towards small and emerging businesses in partnership with other public and private funding. These IRP applications compete quarterly at the national office level. Next slide, please. Eligible applicants include private nonprofit corporations, such as our economic development organizations, public agencies, such as state, local government and branches thereof, federally recognized tribes. And if you are an incorporated cooperative, you have to have 51% or more rural residents as your membership to be eligible. Applicants must demonstrate that they have a successful history of assisting businesses and have experienced staff to carry out the necessary functions of the program. An ultimate recipient must be a U.S. citizen located in a rural area and must be unable to finance their project from their own resources or commercial credit. Eligible purposes include business acquisitions, when the loan will prevent the business from closing or there's a loss of jobs, real estate purchase, construction and improvements, purchase of machinery and equipment and supplies, pollution abatement, debt refinance if the refinance is necessary to create or retain existing jobs, and recreational focused businesses. They've done Mondack Marine in Glasgow. As you can see the picture, oh, you can't see the picture, I didn't have it on that slide presentation. We've done hotels, motels, bed and breakfast, restaurants, C-stores, and convention centers are some projects that we've helped with. Next slide, please. The intermediaries' loan limits are 2 million, and subsequent loans cannot exceed 1 million, with your maximum loan to an ultimate recipient is 250,000, or 75% of their total project. I do want to say that the maximum intermediaries portfolio can be 15 million. So there's a lot of growth with this fund. Ultimate recipient rates and terms are set by the RLF plan, and they're typically based on need, quality assessment of the borrower, and collateral. Next slide, please. If you're looking for an economic development organization to help you, they're not too far away. This map shows our revolving loan fund participants in red, and the ones that are in purple are the eligible EDOs. And this is by no means a comprehensive list because we're adding our partners all the time. We're happy to hand out contact information for our EDOs. So if you need one, just call us. But right here are all of our IRP intermediaries and micro entrepreneurs and development organizations in the next slide. Ta-da! And so next slide, please. The Rural Economic Development Loan and Grant Program, or the Red Leg as we like to call it, is a direct loan program to electric and telephone cooperatives to promote rural economic development and job creation. The applications compete on a quarterly basis at the national office level, and this program may be matched with other programs such as Community Facility or BNI. This is the only pass-through loan program that we have, and its uses are wide and diverse. It can be used for a lot of different things, as I'll go over later on. Just as a word of caution, people tend to get the grant portion mixed up because they think that it's a grant to an ultimate recipient business, and it's not. The red grant is the intermediary's way to seed a revolving loan fund that they can use for other programs. It is not a pass-through grant. Next slide, please. This business can, or program can assist many businesses with their startup costs and expansion, including machinery, equipment, real estate, and it can also fund community facility projects as defined in 7 CFR 4280. Through this program, we funded hospitals with equipment for emergency rooms, ambulances, CT, MRI equipment, billing systems, as well as senior citizen centers, community multi-use event centers, and business equipment for a ticketing agency. And we've even done a rail line trestle system when it was flooded out. We helped pay for them to repair that. Next slide, please. The intermediary receives a loan or a grant from rural development at 0% interest for 10 years. And then they turn that over and reloan that to an ultimate recipient business at this, or community project at the same rates and terms. There is a 2-year deferral period that can be used by the business or the community facility project to get it off the ground. If the intermediary applies for a red loan, the 20% cost share may come from the ultimate recipient. If they're applying for a red grant, they have to actually provide that 20% match. And the intermediary must have a lending system in place as they service the loan, and they're responsible for the repayment, even if the case of the ultimate recipient business defaulting on it. Next slide, please. And if you don't know who your local telephone or electric cooperative may be, please access these websites. They'll be able to get you in contact with an intermediary. One word of, I guess, encouragement here is if you're looking to do a red loan or a red grant and your local electric or telephone cooperative is not interested in doing the project, ask them if they'd be willing to see if another electric or telephone cooperative can come into their area to do this project. They do a lot of cooperation between these cooperatives, so we can make sure that that project can be funded for you. Our last program is the Renewable Energy for America program, and this assists rural small businesses or ag producers to decrease their energy costs, consumption, and improve their bottom line. Next slide, please. We normally see solar renewable energy system projects, but we do have a handful of wind and hydroelectric, and some biomass or anaerobic digester projects. For energy efficient improvements, these include energy efficient windows, doors, garage doors, HVAC systems, water heaters, appliances such as coolers in commercial kitchens, C-stores or grocery stores, ranges and ovens in restaurants, washers and dryers and laundromats. We can also help with replacing incandescent lighting with LED lighting, putting in insulation in buildings, and replacing pivots or grain dryers in silos. So it's pretty diverse here. We've done cabin projects, lodges, fitness centers, ski resorts, stables, fly fishing businesses, and even rafting businesses. So there's a lot that we can do to help support recreational businesses. The REAP may not be used for any residential real estate. That includes single family housing, multifamily housing, or Airbnb type projects. We can't help with farm tillage equipment, used equipment, or vehicles either. Next slide, please. These are our rates and terms for an energy grant. It's 25% of eligible project costs, and there's the minimum and maximum there for you for the renewable energy system and energy efficiency improvements. And then we also can do a guaranteed loan for up to 75% of eligible project costs. If the application is a combination of grant and loan, the guaranteed portion would only be 50%. The grant would be 25%, and then we've got a 25% match that has to come from the ultimate recipient. So this does not mean that it has to come straight out of their pocket. We can use any other form of equity into it, such as DEQ's loan program or other state and local funding that may be available to them. Next slide, please. Well, we're at the end of my presentation. Here's our contact information. And as I promised, there's the map that shows you all of the areas. My area is in pink. The Bozeman area is in green. Billings is in blue. Let me see if I can stop that. Then we have the yellow area is Kalispell, and Missoula is in kind of the orange area. Next slide, please. And we're also on Twitter. So if you follow us, get on Twitter and follow us. We are always updating projects and programs that we're doing. And our website will also have all of our regulations and application materials and any other information that you may need. And that's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Lee. I think, you know, these programs and the fact that we have these really knowledgeable experts across the state is really remarkable. And it's sort of the backbone of our rural economies. So the agencies. So having, I appreciate that Lee talked about one segment of their programs, but I think recognizing they can pretty much build a town from scratch sort of is a great way of capturing it. Next, we have Kent Wellner, and I'm going to have him introduce himself a little bit, but you know, where we had the higher level from Merrill about what the national initiatives are. And some local examples, but with those national programs, national trends, we're going to hear from Kent about how those programs are hitting the ground now and in the future here in Montana and Region 1. So Kent, if you'll introduce yourself a little bit, briefly, and then go for it.
Okay, great. Thanks, Diane. Really appreciate it. Yeah, I'm Kent Wellner. I'm the U.S. Forest Service Region 1 Trails Travel Management and Dispersed Recreation Program Manager based out of Missoula. So that's my role here. And I, like Diane said, Merrill gave a great overview of some of the programs. I'm going to kind of focus what's kind of coming to the northern region, Region 1, and Montana, and kind of focused on recreational infrastructure funding. But largely, it'll be GAOA. So let's go ahead and move to the next slide, Rachel. Thanks. And just want to thank Diane and Rachel for inviting me to participate today. We, Region 1, and I are excited to be a part of this, and just I'm learning a lot just listening to the folks that have presented already today. So really pretty interesting. We appreciate it. Rachel, go ahead. So Region 1 of the Forest Service is composed of 9 national forests and 1 national grassland, 2 national forests in Idaho, 7 national forests in Montana, and 1 national grassland in North Dakota. And that comprises 46 ranger districts across 25 million acres. Next slide, please. So the focus today probably mostly would be Great American Outdoors Act. And that, the Great American Outdoors Act, you'll also hear it called GOA or GAOA on the acronym side. That was enacted on August 4th, 2020. And it provided funding for really 2 different components. The Land and Water Conservation Fund, which is oftentimes referred to, you'll hear LWCF, and that's been funded for quite a few years. And the new funding is the Public Parks and Public Lands Legacy Restoration Fund, known as LRF. And I'm going to talk mostly or primarily about LRF today because that's what's funding, you might say, the reduction of deferred maintenance work on our facilities. That's kind of the focus. Rachel, next slide. So here's a picture of just an example of a GAOA project. This is a lookout, the Double Arrow Lookout on the Lolo National Forest. And I provided some links to Diane and Rachel that you can look at your leisure. Some of these videos are very short, but they provide kind of an overview of these GAOA projects and what's been going on. And probably very similar to projects to come. So just an example of where some of this funding is being spent. Next slide, please. So additional information just in general, there's about $285 million annually in this GAOA, the Great American Outdoors Act funding for each year from FY21 through 25. So it started last year, we're now in fiscal year 22, so the second of 5 years. And about, this is going to vary a little bit, but about 26 million for Region 1 annually will be coming to us each of these 5 years for this work. 65%, at least 65% of that funding needs to be spent on non-transportation assets. So that's, you'll see there, recreation sites, visitor centers, and so on, with no more than 35% spent on transportation assets, primarily roads. And just a real quick clarifier there, trails and trail bridges are in that non-transportation assets, just to make that clear. So really the transportation assets primarily. And GAOA does fund road project. As you all know, roads are an important part of our recreation infrastructure because we all drive on roads to get where we're going. So those are important. The project investments, again, aim to improve and increase public access and really reducing the amount of deferred maintenance, improving those assets for public use and enjoyment. That's the key. And the GAOA funding is really kind of focused on reducing our deferred maintenance backlog, but it won't resolve this completely. There's just, we've kind of been bumping along for so long. There's a lot of deferred maintenance that may not be addressed with GAOA, but this is a huge influx in funding and very much appreciated. So it will help a bunch. Next slide, please. So you'll see here the Great American Outdoors Act priorities. Those are the 5 priorities. I won't read them to you, but those are really the 5 keys or the 5 key priorities that GAOA we're working to meet. Next slide, please. So on the first year, which was last fiscal year, the 2021 funded projects that are either started or will start There were a total of 83 projects in the northern region for $29 million. 54 of those are in Montana. And again, provided the link, you can see that to our Region 1 website, we have a good list of those projects by forest. And I provided that link to Diane and Rachel. Rachel, next slide. So right now we're in FY22. So this year, there's 74 projects that have been tentatively that were in the president's proposed budget for a total of 26.1 million. 55 projects are located in Montana, with 3 additional projects located in both states, Montana and Idaho. Those you can see those are part of the Forest Service FY22 budget justification. And again, there's another link. You can see the list that is in the proposed budget for this year. As you know, we're in a continuing resolution right now. And so what we're hoping is this budget will be passed with these projects, or if Congress chooses to fund the government and our part of the government with a continuing resolution year long, these projects could be added to that year-long resolution. So either way, we're hoping that these 22 projects will be funded and move forward. Rachel, go ahead and go to the next slide. So for 2023, the projects are kind of in the process of being approved. So for 2023, which is next fiscal year, those projects are now sitting at the Forest Service Washington office and the Department of Agriculture for review and approval. And they're really getting reviewed and approved to be put in the president's budget request. Forest Service is part of that for FY23. So we're still waiting to hear what those final lists of. I don't have a list of those because they haven't been approved yet for Region 1. So we're kind of waiting on that, see what kind of that final list is. But that should be done by, you might say, early to midwinter, just before that list is put in to the FY23 budget proposal. So that's coming. Okay, next slide, please. Well, what I wanted to kind of advertise, and this is just kind of a more of a general slide talking about all the different ways that our publics and partners and volunteers have been involved with this GAOA project. Just a tremendous amount of involvement at kind of all levels, just a general interest level, and then a lot of actual help implementing these projects. So starting kind of from the bottom of the list there, we have volunteers that we work directly with on projects and do trail work, trailhead work, facility work, all kinds of work, and beyond just recreation. We're some focused on recreation, but people go out and do volunteer work with the fisheries folks, wildlife folks, with our veg folks. So a lot of volunteer, but with this specifically with GAOA, a lot of volunteers are in agreement. We have a lot of agreements with a lot of different partners, and especially in recreation, again, I'm kind of specifically talking about recreation, but we rely on just our partners to get a lot of work done in the recreation realm on the national forest in this region and across the country. So the agreements we have, that's really an indication. I want to mention that we just do a tremendous amount of work with partners, and they really help us provide quality recreation experiences across the board. A couple other things though, there's contracts. We do get donations for some of these projects, and so that helps. We have certain partners that work with us on specific projects, which is really important. And then we did have listening sessions this past spring in June, and we had 3. We had a listening session for Montana, one for Idaho, and one for North Dakota. And those are accessible on our website as well. So those are, if you want to listen to those, they're accessible on the Region 1 website on the GAOA tab there. Rachel, next slide. So real quick, I'm going to ask Rachel to cue this video up. This is just a really fun video. It's a really short one, only goes for 2 minutes. And it just shows how our partners are engaged in a recreation project. This happens to be the Rock Creek Horse Camp. So Rachel, whenever you're ready, go ahead.
Lake Como in the Bitterroot National Forest is one of the most heavily visited areas in the region, and like all well-loved recreation sites across our national forests, it needed some attention. Using Great American Outdoors Act funding, we've been able to partner with the Bitterroot Backcountry Horsemen's Group today to improve the Rock Creek Horse Camp.
We're replacing fire rings that were put in, probably more than 20 plus years ago that are rusted and they have parts broken. Some of them are in such a state that they're almost unusable.
So we're having to pen them down and then putting gravel in the bottom and then filling them up with cement so that they'll be much easier for the camp host to clean when it comes time to clean them out.
The improvements is going to be, better placement as according to where rings were put in years past. We've got a little better placement, a little better monitoring on use, and so we've got a little better understanding now of where these things need to be and how they should be placed to get the best use and the most benefit to the users in the campground.
This is a very popular campground and lots of people come and enjoy it. It's nice for them to come and find nice campgrounds, trails that are clear. Since I spend a lot of time here, I ride here a lot, and that would be a worthwhile thing for us to get involved with. So it's nice to know that we can share just beyond the club.
The perception, the visual stimulation and impact that you get when you come through a campground and you've got better looking equipment, well-placed campsites. It really makes me happy to see the improvements, stuff that we may or may not have had the funding or the staffing to replace, but it really helps us get caught up on some of this backlogged maintenance that we need, and it really helps us work with those partners that are very vital to the mission and directive of the Forest Service.
Great, thanks for sharing that, Rachel. That's just, I just wanted to share, it's a kind of a neat little short video that just kind of highlights how our partners are engaged in many of these projects. And that's just, again, that's one of our many partners that are working with us on these Great American Outdoor projects. Just a really tremendous amount of work that they're helping us with. So it's pretty neat. So moving on, I want to just talk really briefly about some other funding. And this is, as Merrill mentioned, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, or the infrastructure bill that was signed into law on November 15th of this year. That has a lot of funding for the federal agencies, but I want to mention two that specifically will fund primarily on the trail side, but it will help fund recreation infrastructure. And that's the Federal Lands Transportation Program, acronym FLTP. That's going to fund approximately $24 million, and that's across the entire Forest Service for this fiscal year. So Region 1 will get a chunk of that. And that's aimed at targeted roads and trails. So not all roads and not all trails can be funded using this fund. It's really a special list, but there's both a special list developed for both roads and for trails for each region across the country. And then the Legacy Road and Trail Remediation Program. And this was a program that started back, I believe, in 2008. And it really is a program to restore watershed damaged by decaying roads. And so it funds decommissioning of unneeded roads and in some cases trails, but also critical repairs needed. And I think one of the things you see, especially in this region, would be replacement of bridges or pipes that are creating a lack of continuity for fish passage. So it not only helps fix roads and repair ecosystems, but it helps kind of reestablish connectivity in the stream system. So these are two two fund sources that are coming with this recent passage of the Infrastructure Act. So that's going to be really important and great to see. Rachel, next slide. And I just wanted to provide an example of FLTP funding recently. If any of you are familiar with the Bob Marshall Wilderness Complex, most of you are, but we used FLTP funding to replace a couple bridges at the Hobnail Tom Trail. That's on the Lowell National Forest on Scapegoat end of the Bob Marshall Complex. And there were two trails, or two trail bridges at mileposts 3 and 6 that we replaced using FLTP. Really great work getting those done. And then one that's in between Troy and Libby. The Swinging Bridge outside of Libby is a pretty popular destination for a lot of folks. It's a very popular tourist stop along Highway 2, just outside of Libby. And that was a bridge that was in poor condition. After assessing that bridge, it was decided it needed to be completely replaced, but keeping the same kind of design and features such as the swing and the bounce. That's one of the things people like about that bridge. So the design engineers working on this retain those features. And that's just a picture of the new bridge. It continues to be a very popular spot. Again, I'm just advertising this is how some FLTP funding was used. Next slide. So the questions, if you have questions about GAOA or about any infrastructure projects in Region 1, the best place to go really is, I'll be glad to provide my contact information, but the local district and forest contacts really have specifics about those projects. And Rachel, if you go to the next slide, this is just a quick summary of in Montana of the primary contacts. And again, it's listed as Montana GAOA contacts, but I would really make the observation that any kind of investment in infrastructure, recreation infrastructure, these are your primary contacts at the forest level that can answer any questions. So with that, I think I'm done, and I really appreciate the time and chance to talk a little bit about some of the investments that we're able to make from the Forest Service perspective here in Region 1. Thank you.
Thank you. Wow, my wheels are just turning. And yes, that bounce and swing. I visited that bridge not too long ago, and it's quite an amazing experience, both on the bridge and looking upstream and looking downstream at Kootenai Falls. It really just sort of reminds me, a person who lives on the outskirts of Glacier National Park, how many incredible assets, recreation assets we have in our state and our region. So I'm really thrilled to hear the multifaceted opportunities that there are to support outdoor recreation. I have to tell you, the image that I used to show the overlapping circles in outdoor recreation, I kind of thought about using a COVID type model to show all these points of points sticking up that would fund outdoor recreation in the middle, but I chose circles instead. We have one question here, a specific question, and we have a few minutes, and so I'm gonna ask each of you to answer a question briefly that I'm gonna give you. From Constanza, she's asking if, and I'm not sure which program it is, but I guess would any of your programs fund the production of a handbook or website to basically foster responsible tourism, both by visitors and newcomers? Let's see. Learning investments in local communities, landscape conservation, etc. Reducing landscape impacts. Does that ring a bell with any of your programs? Handbook website?
It could fall under the Rural Business Development Grant Program for an Opportunity Project. Because that's where we do a lot of feasibility studies and things like that. So it might
Great.
fall under that. That would probably be the only one that it would fall under for rural development. I'm not sure about the others.
I will also say that our companion webinar was state funding opportunities, and I split the state and federal. Maybe it was an artificial split, depending on where the money came from. But basically, if you applied to the state, I included it in the state. There, and that also had amazing resources for recreation related support, and some of those programs, both tourism, commerce, FWP, fish, wildlife and parks, and might have a funding opportunity for that as well. With the few minutes we have left, I'm going to ask each of you, our target audience is rural communities and small communities. And so we've seen a lot of millions and tens of millions and hundreds of millions of dollars that are available to each of these programs, which can seem a little out of reach, I think, for rural communities. So I'm going to ask you for your advice about how a rural community can should position itself, steps a rural community can take to position itself to be able to enter the pipeline of these funding opportunities. And I'm going to ask each of you to answer it. We've got about 4 minutes left. So just a quick thought, how rural community can position to benefit from some of these resources.
Do you want anyone in particular to go first? Because I can go first.
I want you to go first, Lee.
Okay. We at Rural Development, we can only work in rural communities. So that they are our focus. A lot of it is just getting in contact with us, get in contact with your economic development organizations. They have a really good pulse point on where all of their funding partners are. We work collaboratively with economic development organizations, the state, other federal partners. So the more that we can get to the table, the better off the project is getting started. But I really do encourage them to check with their economic development organizations, because they're really good at getting everybody to the table and seeing where the best bang for their buck is going to be.
Super. How about you, Kent?
Yeah, I think the best way that, this money is being spent by the agencies on our infrastructure. But again, talk to partners. Partners are engaged, talk to local contractors. And those contacts with the forest are really good contacts to find out what projects where we need partner help, what projects may go contracting. There's some rules and laws around contracting, but nonetheless, we can provide some information about different ways to engage. And then I think just for rural communities to talk to the forest about, what is going to be the important rec infrastructure to, fix, get kind of tuned up, that helps attract folks to the area. That's a pretty key part of, I think, what we're trying to do. Thanks, Dan.
Thank you. Meryl?
Thanks. Yeah, I'll just echo. I think those are great suggestions, and really being able to identify what investments are needed or would be beneficial that reflect local community priorities, and making those ideas and interests known, and then asking for help within the federal family so that we can do some of the work of connecting with each other once we have a sense of what those local priorities and needs are. So just coming forward and saying what would be helpful, and working together so that we can unlock those resources across departments and agencies.
Thank you. Federal family. Federal family member Kirk, any advice?
Yeah, I think truly right now with EDA's structure, this is kind of a shovel-ready opportunity for projects that are there as opposed to an ongoing thing. So unless we continue to fund the outdoor and tourism NOFO that came out or add that to our opportunities, then I don't know that there's a way to plan for it. It's going to be more like if they had a chance and are ready and fits our priorities and are competitive, then here's a chance. But I would also reiterate what Lee said about the economic development districts across the state. There's 11 of them, and the entire state is covered, I think, with the exception of Flathead and Lincoln County and Missoula and Valley County and then Richland County. So there's lots of resources out there.
Great. Well, thank you all so much for taking the time today to share information about your programs and opportunities. Just to remind folks, Rachel, if you'll advance the slides. We have both, number one, this episode will be recorded and it will be available on the website, mtaccessproject.com. Within a day or two. We provide both the presentation and the video. So this is a massive list that we have gleaned from your each of your presentations. So we've compiled it all here. Again, we also make these resources available separately, so you don't have to watch the whole video on our website. And if you'll advance the slide, please. Last call, 3 days left. We are planning our content for next year. We've done these webinar series starting in summer of 2020. I think this is our 18th, maybe. They're incredibly well received and coming at a time when it's really hard to find cross-jurisdictional, cross-agency information. There's a ton coming down the pike and it's hard to make sense of it. So we are planning for next year, and that's what we're asking. That's what we're asking for guidance about how we can help you better. If you take our survey by the 17th, you will be entered to win this crazy, ridiculous, awesome Yeti mug. And Rachel put the link in the survey. We're going to call the question on the 17th, just in time for Christmas, in case you want to regift it. And there you go. So that's it. Thank you. We're done for this year, closing it up. Stay tuned for next year. We'll have more in store, different ways to access this information. So thank you so much. Thank you, Meryl and Kent and everyone from across the state and across the country. And I'll sign off now. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Thanks.